Hey there, okay, we're back and we're ready to start rendering. Well, not quite yet because we haven't actually set up any of the render settings. At the moment, these are what our render settings are looking like. We have no name, we have the myIf files as our basic output, which isn't great for what we want to do as After Effects won't read it. It's also only going to be outputting a single frame. So we're going to need to go through and change all these settings. But first things first, we need to create the name of our scene, which we are going to call cubes, and then we're going to change the image format. Now, this is where you would normally render as something like a TIFF or a Targa, but for the purposes of keeping file sizes low, I'm going to be rendering out as a PNG. And for frame animation, we want to be using name.number.extension. Now, it's usually a lot easier to read the name _.extension, but I generally use .number.extension because this is the format that Maya reads. If you try and import images with a different setup, then Maya doesn't recognize it. So it's just a good habit to be in. And frame padding just adds in extra zeros, so I'm going to put this up to 4. So you can see up the top here how instead of it being cubes.1, it's cubes.0001, and it's just better practice to be in, as some programs don't actually recognize the difference between going from 1 to 10 without the zeros being in front of it. So we've got that set up, and we'll come down to our frame range. We start at frame 1, which is right, and we want to go all the way to frame 120. So we'll just type that in there. And now for our renderable camera, we don't want to render the perspective because that's our working mode. We actually want to be rendering from camera 1. And we're going to keep this aspect ratio as it is at the moment. Feel free to change to like a 16:9, say 1024 by 576, but for the purpose of this exercise, we're just going to keep it as the Maya standards. So this is set up with the basics of what you need to use to get it to start rendering how you want it. So we're just going to do a test render first to make sure that the angle that we're now looking at is lit correctly. Okay, so that's rendered. That's looking fairly nice. We've still got our draft rendering settings on, so we're getting all these jagged edges, which we're going to have to clear up. But in terms of the color, the light, and everything, it's looking like something we can work with. But before we do go on to upping the settings, we're going to look at what's called render layers to set up some extra things that can give the compositing side of this animation just a little bit of an edge. So we'll come back and look at that in the next tutorial.